Good morning. Today is Wednesday, March 24th. It's 9 a.m. This is the morning session of Senate Natural Resources and Energy. We are continuing our work on weatherization, and although the bill has been voted out and traveled down the hall, one of the major components of the three-legged stool that we talk about, maybe ad nauseum for some people at this point, is funding. Is one thing we'll be working on from now through next January for sure. And the other two legs are a workforce development program, as well as a counseling and outreach program to improve reaching the customers that we hope to see this program serve in increasing numbers in years to come. So happily, from my standpoint, in talking recently with Richard Fazy, he had told me that he had gone back out to a number of people all involved in the workforce development piece, where we were really interested in coming up with a something akin to a curriculum statewide, credentialing, a career pathway in building science, as opposed to just becoming a weatherizer, something like that, you know, where, and so most of the witnesses back today have been here before and offered us a glimpse of opportunities to do more of that work. I really want to thank people for jumping in and getting, you know, working ahead of the committee's request for exactly this kind of help. So we'll hear from folks this morning and see what we can learn. We have the opportunity, although we've passed the bill out of committee, to shape, to further edit the bill before it ever gets to the floor. So this isn't just an academic exercise. We'll have the chance to take what we learned today and perhaps make changes to the bill in order to capitalize on that. And with that, I'd like to turn to one of my favorite ringleaders, Kelly Lucci, and ask you to kick us off this morning. Good morning, Ms. Lucci.
Good morning. So for the record, I'm Kelly Lucci, Director of Partner and Customer Engagement with Efficiency Vermont. Thank you for inviting us to come in and share some thoughts with you all on this topic. I just have some notes I'm working from, but there's a lot of information on partnerships, so I'd be happy to put that in memo form and share it afterwards. If it's helpful, just let me know, but and then slow me down if I go through anything too quickly. I want to make sure I don't take time away from all of the other folks who are here.
Sure. Can I just interrupt to say thank you on your offer to put your notes into note form and send it to the committee? That will be helpful. Something we can read offline as well. Thank you.
Perfect. I'll plan to do that. So top level, I just wanted to walk through some key points, and then I'll lay in some details on each of them. But you know, I think that the committee has done some great work on this topic. We really appreciate the holistic focus that you're taking, thinking about weatherization and the sort of system that supports this work getting done well in the state. I do think that Efficiency Vermont will be well positioned to help coordinate these efforts. We have a statewide platform, technical expertise in-house, and we have the Efficiency Excellence Network that we manage. And as well, recent experience devising some workforce development efforts through Act 62 that will position us well alongside many of the other critical partners that are speaking today to help move forward the charge the committee is asking for. The last piece I just want to make sure I call out, and we'll circle back to this, the $2 million appropriation that is currently called out, I think is helpful to help build a foundation here. It is going to be important to continue striking a balance, though, between investments in workforce development, as well as ensuring that there is continued long-term investment in supporting demand for weatherization. Those investments really need to be in balance. We don't want to train people and then not have any businesses that have sufficient demand to want to employ them. So I just want to always encourage the committee to keep that balance in mind.
And may I ask a quick question here? So the budget proposal that you see, you know, that we passed out with the different allocations to workforce and incentives and, the whole kit and caboodle. Is that seem like a balanced portfolio of funding for the next 2+ years? I know we have a job ahead of us to make sure it continues for more than 2+ years, but from your perspective at this point in time, does that seem like a balanced package?
Yes, it does. Yep. I do think that the balance of $5 million to help maintain incentives that we know drove demand, as well as about $2 million focused on workforce, is a good balance to strike. Though it all depends on the level of specific charges that get sort of embedded in each of those buckets. I think thus far the language has been sufficiently flexible to allow us to calibrate things effectively.
Great, thank you.
So I wanted to really just talk a little bit about the current state and sort of the ecosystem, the word of the day as we look at this lately, in terms of organizations that are in this space related to weatherization. So Vermont is very lucky to be home to a large number of organizations that have worked to expand, train, and employ a skilled weatherization workforce. And I know this committee has heard some testimony about why it is so important for people to be properly trained and grounded in building science when they're doing this work. A lot of the other folks who are joining me today can speak to that in more detail. I will just emphasize how important that is from a perspective of safety and customers getting what they're expecting when they hire somebody to weatherize their home. I did want to talk about a lot of the folks who are out in the field doing that work. So we really see it as just a large spectrum, a system of organizations that are working at various places. You have trade organizations such as VBRA and the Building Performance Professionals Association, who work to advance the skills of their members and connect them with support, education, and programmatic opportunities around weatherization and other facets of work on homes. You have organizations and contractors such as the Heat Squad, managed by NeighborWorks of Western Vermont, Authenticated Building Performance Diagnostics, and Analyzing Energy. They all have developed business models that enable them to recruit and support non-BPI certified contractors and oversee their work completing weatherization projects. This has been a really important tactic to help expand access to rebates and programs, especially in underserved regions of the state. The ones we tend to keep our eye on are the Northeast Kingdom and Bennington County in particular. You also have regional organizations such as SEON and Resource, who have created and implemented some very successful training programs. SEON in particular, and I know you're going to hear from Mr. Payne today, has really taken a leadership role on training and has been convening stakeholders and partners to advance that work in the southeastern part of the state for many years. In addition, you have organizations such as Vermont Passive House, which have developed really deep expertise in building science and knowledge of best practices and successful programs underway nationally and internationally. So bringing that best practices to bear to the benefit of Vermonters. You also have Vermont Technical College, which has served as a BPI training center and with whom we partnered to help implement workforce training through Act 62. In effect, Efficiency Vermont and VTC worked on a 2-year effort to expand the trained weatherization workforce that could participate in Efficiency Vermont's programs, leveraging the investments that were made possible through Act 62 to provide paid training and support for folks to obtain BPI certification. You also have educational organizations such as Vermont Adult Learning and the Community College of Vermont, who are exploring certification and training programs for the students they serve. High school technical centers and career and adult education centers, which are looking at various levels to embed training around weatherization into their curricula at various levels. And this includes hands-on components such as working directly on demonstration projects and local homes in the areas they serve. And then, as we've mentioned before, you have the Efficiency Excellence Network and the many contractors who are EEN members who work on weatherization and leverage a variety of business models and range really from one-person shops to larger employers working on jobs that stretch beyond weatherization. And then finally, I wanted to call out program implementers such as VGS, Vermont Gas, 3E Thermal, Vermont's 5 low-income weatherization agencies, and the Office of Economic Opportunity, alongside Efficiency Vermont, that design and manage programs to support Vermonters in weatherizing their homes. So as you can tell, that's a long list. It is a complex system, but I think it gives us a really strong grounding and basis for doing this work well. And as we step back and look at that system as it exists today, there are a number of kind of gaps and opportunities that we see, and where we would look to focus in implementing any workforce training program going forward. I'll just pause and ask if there are any questions on the list I shared, any additional clarification needed.
Sure, thanks. And that's why your notes are going to be helpful. I can't write fast enough. I can see that.
The notes will come. I'll get them to you later today. Yes.
I do have a quick question about, you mentioned BPI. Is that currently the most widely recognized standard? And is that apt to become the sort of certification that Vermont will adopt, or will we add to it? And maybe that's just a question for when Mr. Payne is up, or Mr. Bradley. And another thing I'll just put on the table is, in talking with the Agency of Education and DOL, they mentioned apprenticeships. So I'm not sure exactly what the modern version of an apprenticeship is, and how we support such things, and how they might fit into bringing people into the ecosystem. And then, although you listed a lot of people, that to me is actually encouraging, because one of the few things I retained from environmental science in college was ecosystems are robust to the extent they are diverse. So we're not counting on any one provider to haul everyone else along. It's like, so it's great that we have an actual ecosystem of providers. So, thanks.
I would agree. I'll take each of the questions in turn. And again, I think there are other folks who may want to elaborate on it and their statements as well. I would say BPI certification is the standard that we have leveraged to date. There are various levels of BPI certification, and I would expect that would be core to the plan that's developed. Although, again, we're creating a process, so it'll be great to get other perspectives on that as well. Apprenticeships, yes, I think that's something we will likely want to look at as well in this space. I don't know that there's any active work on apprenticeships going on now, though some of the others who are speaking today may be more up to date on current states there. So I would, again, defer and encourage them to speak to that when they testify. And then I think the last point on the diversity of the ecosystem, yes, I'm glad if nothing else, we're taking away that this is a diverse and strong ecosystem with a lot of very effective organizations who I think can work together to create a more cohesive statewide approach to this. And I think that's a very exciting aspect of what the committee is asking us to do.
Okay, thank you.
So in terms of gaps, opportunities, and considerations, we just want to make sure are kept in mind moving forward. I noted a long list. I will note that in putting that together, there's no one place to get this information on current weatherization workforce development activities. I pulled that together because we have a long history of working with many of these partners. It's likely not totally comprehensive. I think we're going to learn more about work in this space as the working group moves forward. So I just wanted to make sure I put that caveat on the table. It's grounded in the experience that we've had as Efficiency Vermont. I think it is fairly comprehensive, but it may not be complete. I think the need to develop a cohesive and consistent career path that takes into account the full spectrum of weatherization work is really important too. We talked about different levels of BPI certification. We talked about different business models that have enabled folks who are certified and who run businesses to actually oversee the work of others who maybe don't have that skill set. I think that's going to be a critical tactic we want to employ going forward. But I think there are other ways that we can probably look at flexing the system and really thinking about creating a path approach statewide. So I appreciate the charge that the committee has offered there. I think they're correct to point out that gap. It'll be really important as well to think about a coordinated approach to recruitment and how we create a pipeline of trainees across all of the existing programs. So that's a gap I expect we'll want to look at as a working group. And finally, I mentioned this up top, I just want to emphasize it again. The market for skilled weatherization jobs is still pretty nascent in the state, and it is highly dependent on public and programmatic investments from the program implementers I listed above. So that's Efficiency Vermont, alongside many others who implement programs. And for that reason, it is very important that we don't think about making workforce investments in a vacuum. We have to make sure that they are in balance with broader systemic investments the state wants to make in supporting the market for weatherization and driving demand for those projects and ensuring that the work ultimately is done with safety and health in mind. So really keeping in mind the need for adequate, consistent, and an approach that's oriented for the long term to really develop this market. I don't think we have had over the last decade the ability to really focus on this in the way that we ought to have. And we've had a lot of stop-starts of funding. And I think if nothing else, having this broader conversation has given us an opportunity to really call out the need for a longer term approach, which will support a better experience for customers and Vermonters, and a better experience for the contractors who are engaged in this work and want to be able to build business models around it with some level of predictability. Sure. Finally, I mentioned this above as well. A $2 million appropriation, I think, is a down payment. It can help build this foundation. It's not going to address everything you want, likely. So it's going to be important to make sure we understand your highest priorities and that we keep the charge focused in terms of balancing the work of actually implementing versus crafting that statewide plan, and that we understand we may articulate a plan, but not be able to move forward all aspects of it. So really, again, thinking about this over a long time horizon, even though the funding and the charge to the working group are shorter in the timeline.
Sure. One quick response to that is, although S109, it's the current funding, we're talking about 2+ years. The bill talks about a 10-year planning horizon. And I've often said that's really the first 10 years of, I think several decades of work before we would ever catch up to where we would like to be. I think the estimate I saw a week ago from Sarah Phillips at OEO was that there are about 43 to 45,000 low-income homes, I think, currently, that theoretically that could all be in that to-do list. So we, even at a higher pace than our roughly 1,000 a year, we have a lot of work there. And then there's the whole, all the other income levels, all the other housing that's out there. So I appreciate, and the committee is, I think, very committed to that notion of steady long-term funding. We're going at that in two ways. One is that we're not looking for a silver bullet, where we're looking for multiple funding streams so that we're not leaning on any one quite so hard. That could make the political lift, frankly, a little easier. But we know there's a political lift ahead. And we're committed to doing everything we can to achieve that long-term funding, because we've all been down the road of fits and starts, and it's a problem for everyone involved. So we get that.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Just some broad questions I wanted to ask, and that, I think we can hone in on today, but certainly, if there's any additional context the committee wants to provide, I think it'll be welcome to us as all of us start thinking about how we're going to move forward most effectively come summertime on this work. I think that as I noted above, it's important to keep the questions and the outputs fairly focused, especially with the request for a report to come back by the beginning of October. So I'd be interested, and I suspect my my partners here would be interested as well in hearing a little bit more about priorities and areas of particular focus from the committee's perspective. To the extent that can be elucidated a little bit in the dialogue today, it'll help us get a good head start on planning how we might want to tackle this most effectively. And ultimately, we recognize we're at the midpoint of a process here. So I just want to call out that, assuming this stays, framed up in the way that it is, with the specific output of a report, the appropriation to actually begin making a down payment on some of these training initiatives, I think it's feasible, but it'll be important to keep an eye on that through the rest of the process. I think it would be challenging to move this forward effectively with less than 2 million, given the number of partners involved in this space and the amount of work that needs to be done. So just something to keep in mind. Concluding thoughts. So we've provided in prior weeks, as this process has unfolded, we've provided some high-level thoughts on how the $2 million workforce development allocation could be invested. I just want to note that I think this plan is going to continue to evolve, and I think it's important that it continue to evolve because we're all learning, and we're all learning more about what the committee is expecting us to accomplish here. And I think it'll be really important to maintain some level of flexibility in terms of how we go about this work. Not trying to dive in and say $2 million broken out here, here, and here. I think all of us will want to be able to go through the working group, the planning process, and have some flexibility to make some shifts maybe from what we are assuming today we might want to do to where the plan might take us on the other side. So I just encourage, the language to stay at the level that it is rather than diving too much more into the details. Our intention is to engage in an inclusive and transparent process for collaborating with all the partners in this space, including those we may not yet be connected to, in order to really build this plan together. And we want to make sure it's as solid as it can be. So thank you again for the opportunity to kick things off today. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the other folks and to learning more about the committee's thoughts as well.
Great. Senator McCormick or Senator McDonald, any thoughts you want to share with Ms. Lucci before we move on?
No, I thank her.
Okay.
Thank you for your thoughts.
I can share a little bit based on past conversations in this committee around, I appreciate your request for focused questions to the work group and getting specific about outcomes so that you're not not working without enough helpful direction to know what success looks like, from our side of things. And so I'll just share from my own listening to our conversations over the last 2 months and the committee's conversations. I think that one of the things that really kicked this off, it's too bad he's not here yet. I know he was tied up. Senator Westman said, let's not build, a half dozen programs all over the state independently. Let's try to figure out, leave flexibility in the system that's specific to the group, the task, the place, but have a common core, I think, that is a shared. So not overly prescriptive, but some shared material, and then it gets customized, I think, by the venue that it's being offered in or used in or something like that. So coordination was a priority. You've mentioned funding levels. So I think we would be looking to the group, as you're figuring out what a solid program statewide looks like, that's integrated and both integrated and has certain independent elements in it. What's the budget look like for the long haul, so that we're aware of what adequate funding is? No, it's not a we don't want to hobble the work by underfunding. And then if you see in any way current statutory language that drives programming that in some way feels counterproductive, or just a missed opportunity, either something problematic, or if our statutes, I'm not even sure what they would be at the moment, but if you saw a statutory change, you know, that maybe it could come up in building codes, could come up in inspections, could come up in home ratings, certification, who knows where it would be. So those are three things, you know, at the outset that I think that have actually sort of motivated today's meeting and conversation. And then last, you know, I'm sure that this is going to be an interesting work group with plenty of active thinking. And I'm figuring it's going to be with the committee to the extent that we're involved, that'll be iterative. You know, there'll be a report in October, and I'm not thinking it is like, you know, all done. I'm figuring that'll really, the point of this report is to be something useful as a staging platform for us to build next year's programming and bills and budgets, and that we will actively use that work to inform what we do next in this committee. So I think that's the other thing. I don't want you to feel like you're writing, quote unquote, a report that's going to infamously just sit on somebody's shelf. This is for us input to a working document known as next year's bill. So thanks. All right. Senator McDonald, I see you looking up. I don't know if that's a signal, like you have thoughts to share.
Mr. Chair, I applaud the notion of coming up with a standard rather than a bumper sticker that says we insulate. And we are spending a lot of money to create a workforce that we have yet to make a funding commitment to, and that is our weakness. That we're always afraid to invest in what we think is important, but that's not the fault of those who would ready this workforce. And when they're ready to go to work, and we don't have any funding, then we're all in deep kimchi. So, but that's not different than how we often trudge towards our goals. So, thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, with the image of Sisyphus in my mind, now we're gonna move forward and invite Mr. West to speak with us next. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you very much for giving us an opportunity and me an opportunity to speak to you. I'm a big fan of Sisyphus. He is an important symbol. It's not always hitting your head against the wall, but it certainly does feel that way with such a big project in front of us. Just a little bit of background. My name is Chris West. I own an energy building science consultancy in Jericho, Vermont. I've lived here for 11 years now, and am a past president of the Home Builders Association, so a current member of the board there. I'm one of the founding members of the Vermont Passive House, and have been working with BPI certified people to do weatherization work and retrofit work on houses, often getting called to look at mistakes that were made during weatherization projects that need to be remedied. I also am an active member of a number of initiatives to increase building science knowledge around builders in general. I am a teacher. I teach the Passive House certified Passive House consultant for the Passive House Institute US. And those are that have a degree in mechanical engineering. That is the basis of all that. I want to start off by saying I have a lot of national and international contacts. Nationally, Efficiency Vermont is the envy of the country. When I talk to people doing this type of work elsewhere in the country, and I tell them, well, I just get in touch with my colleagues at Efficiency Vermont if I have a question, not about building science per se, because that's my area of expertise, but on getting information out to people or on directing someone to the available programs, looking for well-heeled and certified contractors to do work and to get access to subsidy monies that the state have charged Efficiency Vermont with managing. I tell the people in states, Vermont is known in the Passive House circles as being a bastion, and Efficiency Vermont is a very big part of that. We've been working with Efficiency Vermont. I've been a member of the EEN network for the past 7 years and hold that in high regard. I think that Efficiency Vermont has a proven track record of working on and implementing programs that are effective and at a scale that now is not enough, but could easily be scaled up, working with partners throughout the state to get a workforce training and development program for weatherization workers. And on top of that, and I think this is an important point that Kelly pointed out, that we're all going to emphasize, we're looking at wanting to fulfill the comprehensive energy plan promise of 120,000 houses weatherized by 2030. And we're doing about 2,000 houses a year as a state, maybe a little more than that, a little less depending on the year. So obviously, as was already pointed out, we're going to need to ramp up the workforce to do that. A big part of that, which has already been mentioned, is the need for the state to have an active hand in driving the perception in the homeowners that this is something that is important to do and that we want to do that, so that they're also on board with our goal of 120,000 houses. In order to reach that type of a goal, we're going to need to double our weatherization workforce a couple times over in order to have the people to do that. Obviously, we don't want to train people and have them out there until there's demand. Right now, there is incredible demand for this type of work. The people who do this type of work are booked well out into the end of this year on weatherization work. And we are getting calls on a regular basis to do energy audits. And our people are asking us, who do we go to? And we're like, okay, that's a good question. We'll send you to these 5 people that we work with who are all parts of the EEN network, who are in this region, but who are booked out. So there are a lot of factors there. But part of what I wanted to put in there is that we're not just going to be needing to train people who are going to crawl into attics and pull out insulation, do air sealing and re-insulate properly, following good building science protocols. But we're going to need to develop businesses that will be able to fill the need, and those people are going to need support and build, business management training and all that type of thing to make sure that they are not fly by night. The history of the state, and you've all spoken to this, I just want to reemphasize, is I was in a meeting with a number of elder statesmen, as it were, in the building science and weatherization and adult training in the state. And the 4 people got into a room and said, hey, I remember sitting in a room in 1985 when we were talking about this exact same thing. So just to reemphasize the need for continuity and taking advantage of this opportunity to put something in place that would get us to 2030 with a good workforce that's doing good work in the field, not work that I'm going to get a phone call from clients saying I had the people come out and do the work, and now my soffits are rotting because they spray foamed everything and that wasn't the right thing to do. So those are important bits. I did want to speak just really quickly to the question about BPI as a certification. As Kelly did point out, BPI has a number of different certifications. The most important part of BPI certification for a program like this, from my point of view, would be the people who are going and doing the analysis of the building before any work is called for, and the people who are writing up the list of things that should be done. Those people need to be well versed and knowledgeable in the building science and the best way with the various types of buildings that we have in Vermont, all the way from houses from the late 1700s, all the way up to houses that were built just a couple of years ago. All have different requirements, all require different approaches in order to ensure that once the work is done, that the investment that the state has done in this and that the homeowners are doing are going to provide the expected change in comfort and reduction in energy use, but also durability and health and safety of that house well into perpetuity. So the BPI certification is that we're looking at is specifically for the analysts, and that's something that BPPA and Efficiency Vermont are well on top of, as well as CION and other groups. The VBRA has been working on frameworks for apprenticeships. We have a large number of builders in our membership who do this type of work, and there's no sense in making 500 new weatherization techs if there aren't places for them to work in a company to do that. So an apprenticeship program is something that I think we as the VBRA, and I'm not only speaking for the VBRA, but as one of the people who's in the rooms when we're discussing these types of programs, that the VBRA could be helpful in getting an apprenticeship program started. I know that the EEN also has members that are not all members of the VBRA, who could also help implement an apprenticeship program where we could take people who are given the basic information and then getting their sea legs out in the field actually doing the work. And which is already something else that Kelly also pointed out, is this is not very nice work. This is really hard, dirty, nasty work. And there are going to be people who do it for a couple of months and say, I'd rather work at Starbucks. And I get that. So we need to provide a development path from weatherization work into other construction work. And we do need those workers in other parts, not just weatherization, but in general construction and retrofits also. So we want to make sure that when we're developing these plans with Efficiency Vermont and other players in the state, the tech centers, et cetera, that we're looking at offering these people not just a one-stop, here you are, you're going to be a weatherization tech forever, but give them opportunities to develop further. One of the things I wanted to bring up after Senator Bray asked about statutory things that can help, it sounds counterintuitive, but the contractor registry is a huge and important part in professionalizing the overall level in the state. It's a very soft touch. We're asking only in that for contractors to be on a list, to have insurance, and to use a contract. After that, it's not asking much, but that is one of those other statutory steps that we are working on as well, that I think would be helpful in the ecology, as we're talking about it, of businesses. So I want to make sure I get all my points out there. I know so Richard put together an amazing document which covers all of the pieces that we're going to be speaking to today. So if you need to review any of the things that we were talking about, that is where I would start. We're very excited about this initiative, and we're very excited to be at the table here. We think that we have a lot to offer, especially people like me and Jim Bradley, who, like I said, are regularly going to houses where weatherization was done wrong. So we want to make sure that any programs that are enacted include the building science level that will make sure that those mistakes, which happen usually because of lack of knowledge, are as few and far between as possible. And that's basically the points I wanted to bring up, and would like to ask the senators if they have any questions for me.
Thank you. Let me take a look around, and Senator Westman's been able to join us. I want to give credit where credit is due. Really organizing an approach we talked about earlier before he arrived, coordinating to the extent that things need to be coordinated while still leaving room for the individual situations that people are working in. That balance, the need to pull things together comes from Senator Westman's past work. So I did want to ask a question about, because it haunts us a little bit. You mentioned that some of your work has been related to looking at past mistakes, diagnosing them, and then letting someone fix them.
Yeah.
So to the extent that the state stands behind this program, because we're finding funding for it, so even if we're not the contractors, we're helping with all that. We're helping, we hope, drive a bigger, better program. So I think everyone in the committee, and Senator McDonald, let's point this one out. We don't want to have the first crop of people visited have problems, and then it spoils the the program gets a bad reputation.
Yep.
And then people don't sign on. So can you just say a little more about what kind of problems tend to crop up, and how we can avoid those problems?
Absolutely. The biggest problems that we find is when a contractor goes in and unwittingly creates a situation by changing how an attic vents, that there's a buildup of moisture due to clogging of soffit vents, of spray foam everywhere, of not understanding how moisture moves, even if air is not moving through something. So we've seen a lot of places where a contractor would go into an attic and say, well, you've been insulating it on the flat, let's move it to the attic, to the actual roof line, and they just spray foam that shut. The problem with that is that you're creating what we call a vapor sandwich. When you do that, the outside of it is shingles and other things that are not vapor open, and the inside is then sprayed with a vapor closed spray foam. Any moisture that was already in that, or any moisture that travels through that spray foam and deposits in that assembly, has nowhere to dry. So there are some very, very straightforward things. We were at a building a couple of weeks ago where the builder created what's called a dead space, intentionally created a dead space. And a dead space is an attic space that has no venting at all to the outside, so or to the inside. So we had a buildup of moisture in that attic, which was causing mold to grow on the inside of the sheathing. So almost all of the failures that we've run into have to do with not understanding how moisture operates and venting operates in these buildings. And the way to fix that is to make sure that people understand you about how moisture works in a building. And that's a slightly tricky one. People think very easily about how heat moves from hot to cold, warm air rises, that type of thing. But that moisture, water droplets, microscopic water droplets in the air move from your inside of your house through your wall and deposit on the inside of the exterior sheathing during any normal winter, is something that people can't really wrap their heads around. Now, it does often, if it's built right, dry back into the house during the summertime, when the vapor drive is from the outside to the inside. But that takes a bit of explaining. And those are the biggest building science failures we see, is not understanding how ventilation and vapor works. One of the reasons we have houses that are 200 years old is because there are 20 air changes per hour at 50 pascals. So yeah, it's certainly not going to rot, but you also have to throw lots of BTUs at it to keep it moderately comfortable. So we're trying to make our buildings tighter because that saves energy, but we have to make sure that we're not trapping moisture when we're doing that.
Sure. It seems as though ventilation is one of the things that people think about sealing so much. It seems to me like the general public doesn't necessarily hear about air changes.
Right, and there are
Quite
two of
so
those. I
much.
just need to be clear. There's infiltration air changes, which is usually called out at 50 pascals, which is what happens when wind blows against a house, or the stack effect where warm air pushes out. And then there's what we call hygienic ventilation, which is also in air changes, but that's how much fresh air you need in a house to have healthy indoor air quality. We do have to watch out. I'm not expecting that to happen with most of these buildings, and I'm getting a bit deep in the weeds on the building science, and I apologize. But if a house is made more airtight than 2 air changes per hour at 50 pascals, which is that infiltration rate, then it's recommended that mechanical ventilation is introduced to make sure that the indoor air quality, that hygienic air, is up there. And that is in code with new buildings that we just I've had the good fortune of being on the advisory boards for the past 3 iterations of code, and we are getting better about requiring mechanical ventilation in new buildings. So that's I just want to make sure you understand the difference between air changes.
Great. Well, there's always more to learn, and it's always interesting. Senator McCormick.
Thanks. It's interesting how every issue invariably leads you to another issue. Where the issue is energy efficiency, we find ourselves dealing with moisture problems. But I was going to ask, what about basements? Is it possible to have a basement that's too tight as well?
I would not say that. No, we don't want. So there was for a very long time the idea that you needed to vent basements, and from the outside. So we had those basement, those little vents that we'd put in the basement. In the end, building science has shown that we don't want to vent our basements. We don't want to make our basement a dead space, right? We don't want no communication between our basement and the rest of the house air-wise. We want that all to work. But the actual basement itself can be very airtight, and often is, because concrete is not something that lets air through very much. So an airtight basement is a good thing. An airtight insulated basement is a good thing, as long as it is not cut off from the air in the rest of the house, because we want moisture to be able to move through the air and not create any dead spaces, as I was saying.
What about ground moisture? If you have
if the basement is properly appointed, then there should be no ground moisture in a basement. A basement should have a moisture barrier down, and then a slab on top of it as the best situation. We go into a lot of basements that crawl spaces too, that have just dirt or gravel, and one of the first things we say is you've got to stop that passive moisture migration from the ground into that basement by putting down a barrier and stopping that moisture migration.
Just a sheet of plastic.
Yeah, and there are certain products that we recommend above other products. The plastic has to be made into one contiguous piece of plastic. We want all the seams taped between the seams and also at the edges onto the wall itself, so that there's no moisture getting into that space.
Do you do energy audits? Do you do moisture audits?
We moisture analysis is a part of any energy audit. So when we're going in and doing, and that's one of the important things about the Bpi certification for people who are going in and doing the audits, is that we're not just looking at energy. We're looking at air leakage. We're looking at durability. We're looking at moisture. Oddly enough, an infrared camera is one of the best ways to check moisture, because moisture anywhere is visible as a cooling as the moisture in that thing evaporates. It's called evaporative cooling. And so you can find moisture in a wall, in a basement, using an infrared camera. So we also have moisture sensors that we bring with us to double check. We don't say, the camera is the end all and be all, but when we're in a house and we look at a ceiling and we notice usually water does a round thing, and that round thing it tells us, so there's when a drop of water hits a piece of sheetrock, it then doesn't make a a dot here. It actually spreads out into like a round shape. And that is something that we would then go with a moisture sensor and say, well, okay, let's go deeper into this. So yes, moisture is very important, and it is a part of any audit.
Thanks. I've used my public office for a personal concern long enough. I'll hand it back to the chair.
Well, not for nothing, Senator McCormick, if you're interested in knowing more about what's going on in your building, then having an EEN certified auditor come and do an analysis at your building is highly recommended.
Thank you.
Well, this is the citizens legislature, so we wear more than one hat building.
I count
and-
myself as I'm a representative citizen.
Yeah.
There are other people with similar concerns to mine. So.
Okay. And I also wanted to let our guests know that Senator Campion, who was also tied up on an earlier meeting, has joined us. So good morning, Senator Campion.
Good morning. I apologize. I've been with the corner office with the pro tem.
In trouble again. All right, no problem. We understand.
Story of my life.
If there are no more questions for Mr. West, thanks so much.
I did
And
want to
we'll
point
go-
out one more thing.
Yeah, please.
Jim Bradley and I have a building science radio show. It just ended, but on WDEV. And if you're interested in knowing more about building science from a lay perspective, we have a YouTube channel that we take our radio shows up and put them up on. And we cover basements and moisture and all those things. So it's called House Calls Vermont. You can just do a YouTube search on House Calls Vermont. And we also have an email. You can contact us if you want to have other questions. Not that everybody in this room, we have a lot of building science experts, but if you wanted more information from a lay point of view, that's a resource.
All right, well, great. This is one of the few committees you could make this pitch to, and you'd end up with 5 new followers.
There you go. I'll put the link in the chat.
Yeah, honestly, do that. That will be helpful.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. So, Mr. Bradley, good to see you back again. The ball's in your court. Take it away.
Great. Well, thank you for having me back once again, and thank you for this opportunity. Since our last time that we met, one thing that has been going on is behind the scenes, as you well know, we've gotten together, as you said, a little bit ahead of things in a good way, but with different groups around the state to make sure that what goes forward from here is going to be very effective. So that on the other side of this, we're going to have something that remains and something we can point to as a success and an ongoing success. And you guys have already been, touching on so many things that could be potential problems if we don't invest this time wisely, if we don't have an effective working group developing the policy, procedures, and standards that are necessary. Now, keep in mind, a lot of these already exist. The infrastructure already exists. The knowledge base already exists. You have key players in the field that are already doing great work. You have master trainers out there that are already training people, but it's bringing it all together. And, the one thing that years ago I remember I had mentioned when I first joined the BBRA is that there were so many training opportunities through different organizations out there. And yet a lot of times you would miss those training opportunities, and many of these are free. It just takes your time investment. Granted, during COVID, that has blossomed in a sense where there are so many more online training opportunities to get the proper education that you need. And one of the things I'm hoping as we go forward here is that there is a resource center developed through the Efficiency Vermont program that they already have, so that we have a global calendar for some of those training opportunities, so that people can't say, well, where do I get this knowledge? So many times when Chris and I do go out to different houses, and when builders call upon us and saying, well, where do I get this information? We point to, yes, at times Efficiency Vermont, other resources, but having something that we can point to a global calendar that's available statewide, region-wide, whatever, would be great to be able to capture some of those opportunities. But, one of the reasons why I got into this, I was a builder first. I've been a builder for 30 plus years. I've been a high performance builder and an energy auditor / weatherization contractor for 16 years. But I got into this because I was seeing that there was really a need for people to understand better how to do things right. And what I was taught early on in building, a lot of this was insulation was the only thing you had to be concerned about. And you do that, you fill the cavity at the end of the job before you put sheetrock up and call it good. You didn't look at the building as a system. as we move forward with this, we have to look at this system that we're running forward with here now. And we have a key opportunity that doesn't come along very often. As Chris said, there are people that met in the 1980s that said now, wait, we're having the same conversation again, but no tangible results. And really what we do as we go forward, we have to make sure that we're treating this whole program as a system, getting the nuts and bolts right. It's nice to go to the car shows in Detroit when we could to see the new concept cars. But when the concept cars never come to reality, it was nice to look at, it was nice to talk about, nice to think about, but did we have something tangible on the other side? And I see that we really have this golden opportunity for this to go forward in the correct way if we invest the time appropriately. And if we invest the time appropriately through this working group, drawing on the knowledge base of the different entities that are willing and ready to step up to the plate and already have, then we can have something on the other side that really yields the results we're looking for. One thing that strikes me in this is we're talking about weatherization, and we're kind of segmenting that or compartmentalizing that. And what you've already keyed off on here is weatherization doesn't need to be just compartmentalized, because it goes to every component of the building. And this program has the opportunity, by getting this right and bringing the right people in to be educated, not just new people into the field, but existing people into the field that are in the field now, is to up their game or elevate their game to make sure that they're doing this right. Because people would ask me, what house needs a blower door test or an audit? Well, I would say every house, brand new to the oldest to the newest, should have some kind of test done just to make sure that the system is going to be working appropriately. And so with that, I would say that getting the fundamentals of building science right and weatherization, the weatherization, the way we're looking at this is after the fact, after the problem was already created and it needs to be improved upon. That is important, but it's also vitally important that we get this right up front. Now, with that, if we have a company that's invested in weatherization and they develop cohesive relationships with other builders that are out there, whether it's like what I do now through Efficiency Vermont and as a BPI certified individual, I will bring other outside of network contractors into this process to make sure that they're doing the work correctly, giving oversight to that, building science knowledge so that they can improve the system as they go forward, not just what I find on site that day, but in the new builds that they're going to do or remodeling projects. And so having that opportunity, I think, is really fundamental. But flip the coin a bit. If you're doing just weatherization and you're going to fundamentally change how a house operates, then you need to understand construction as well. Because let's say you have an old attic that was underframed and it was really leaky and it's never had a structural problem in the past. But all of a sudden you change the fact that the air is not leaking out of the attic, and then it's carrying a higher snow load on top of that roof. That dead load then becomes a detriment to where it can actually cause a failure in the structure. So you need to have that understanding. Doesn't mean you don't go forward with the changes. It just means you bring the proper resources to the table. And I believe this working group can make sure that these pieces that already exist are put into proper play so that we can get something that's really robust and effective. What is important as well, as somebody is in this field, and you guys have touched on this already, the committee has, is that there needs to be a source of continued funding, because this is a great start and it's a great opportunity to get the foundation right. But at the same time, if someone's going to invest in a workforce, if someone's going to invest in not just training that workforce, but as a company wanting to grow or even specialize in this further, they're going to need to know that, will I continue to have jobs going forward that will be funded? That comes into play with incentives to homeowners to actually do the work. But I look at it as well as if that, because a huge point, we spoke about apprenticeship and OJT, on the job training. I was in the military first, and in construction as well. A lot of that was, yes, classroom time, but also on the job training. Because until you've been in an attic, until you've been in a crawl space, to know how non-glamorous that kind of work is, and how, like, when you're in an attic, that it's not just about air sealing the leaks, but how do you support yourself in that attic? Are you going to put holes through the sheetrock? Are you going to fall through the sheetrock? What are the hazards to look out for? The proper PPE that you're going to use. You can see things up on a projector or even a Zoom meeting, but until you get out there in the field and have that opportunity to do the work, you're not going to really have that understanding. So being able to have that type of apprenticeship program that would help incentivize employers to bring others into the trade. So let's say that they do have a new worker or a transitioning worker into that field and they get on board with this program. I'm just saying it should be considered could be considered to help fund that process. And that's where the Department of Labor, I think, can be helpful in this, because they already have some programs where they'll augment the salary, even cover some of the insurance money that's required for a new employee for a certain time period until they get up to speed. And usually I think it's about a 6-month period. And so if that can be brought into this, it can help the money that we're looking at today go a bit further. And so that's an opportunity that I think we should at least consider, and that can be considered during the working group process. But as far as builders, Chris touched on this as well, and it's almost, because of the show that we do, but also because the audits, when we get out there in the field, we'll see the hazards all the time that are created. And it's not because somebody tried to do something wrong. It's, well, this was the greatest thing during that day and that time. But one thing we see missed most of the time when there is a failure, once again, is the lack of respect or understanding of vapor drive and how to properly deal with that vapor management process. And so having a resource for others to draw from, and so we can have something integrated with people in the field doing weatherization, but also that understanding of building science up front, and in trying to bring existing contractors, builders that is, into this educational process, I think is really crucial as well. And we should not miss that. And once again, if we do invest in this appropriately, this will continue to spend in several ways. It'll yield us the results. It is about energy efficiency, but it's also about the health and safety and durability. A lot of times, and I think I might have touched on this in a different committee, but we look at, okay, how do we make something really efficient now? We build it tight, we don't ventilate it right, we don't give respect to proper moisture management, and that assembly fails prematurely. Part of the passive house philosophy is that you're going to build a highly functional assembly that will be highly functional at the 100-year mark and beyond. If we're not looking at our assemblies in the work that we're trying to do now, that it's going to be a really effective assembly, we're going to be replacing those resources prematurely. There's a lot more energy that's spent just to get those materials created and brought to the job site to be reinstalled. And so to avoid that, to help offset that so it doesn't happen, would be crucial in the part of the process. I was doing a commissioning for a Zender air handler last week, and one of the builders came in and he says he lives in a house that someone came in and did a lot of air sealing. But now he's got mold problems. They've got indoor air quality problems. His girlfriend can't sleep at night. They have, with the mold issues, she has respiratory issues, and they didn't have that before they moved into this building. And this building was appropriately, when I say appropriately, it was tightened up. It's not just about tightening up. It's also about getting the science of the operation of the home long-term correct. And that's why indoor air quality is really crucial. If we are going to get close to or achieve the goal of getting 120,000 homes properly appointed, we have to give proper respect to the indoor air quality component, because that right there is going to affect the health and safety. And that's why, as it was mentioned previously, we don't want to do some work right out of the gate here and then have the public perception be soured because of for legitimate reasons, and so that's why I think is really crucial. But let me just look at my notes here so I don't miss anything. There's that. And then we have this. No, I think for now that should be it. I just wanted to make sure, because when the others were speaking, I was taking notes down feverishly. But at this point in time, once again, thank you for the opportunity, but I would be willing to entertain any questions that you may have.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Bradley from the committee? Okay. Senator McDonald?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Bradley has presented with us the challenges to repairing homes. And if we've learned any lesson from how we deal with people that repair automobiles and how you certify such repairs or see that they're not being done incompetently, is paramount to operating a home repair and home upgrading business. And we constantly look at the people that we wish to market weatherization to, and they're the folks we're starting out that don't have the resources, and they have been burned over and over again by automobile salespeople and automobile repair people. And the witness has tried to lay out a way to be able to successfully market this product that we think is absolutely vital. And we could have the best trained people, but if we don't tackle that quality aspect, and the people that we approach to have their homes weatherized don't believe that that exists, we're in big trouble. So and it's a difficult task to achieve, and it can't just be done by saying everybody doing this business is in good faith. So any more that we can say it about everybody that repairs automobiles is you get what you pay for. So this is important. It's not just bureaucracy. It's just not just regulation, and that's what we do in the legislatures. We regulate. It's a key to getting what our goals are. So,
if I may,
thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I may ask,
Thank you.
Senator McDonald, is one thing that is I cringe when I see it, is when you see a big box store trying to sell more pink insulation, a few tubes of caulking, and say, go solve all your problems. And it's just because the improper understanding of how a house functions, you're right, can cause a lot of problems. So it's getting that public awareness out there, knowing that there is a resource they can go to, so that we can make sure as many people as possible will draw on that. One thing that Chris and I have been surprised about in a real favorable way is by doing this radio show. I mean, once again, we do this because we're passionate about it. We don't get paid. But the number of people, from builders to consumers alike, that have called in with wonderful questions about some really bad issues, but they're trying to prevent, solve a problem, but to prevent it from happening again. There is a public outcry for this. It may not be seen as much, but it's not just because it got cold and they're spending more on fuel. They want to know, how do I prevent these problems? How do I fix these problems? And having a resource center for that through Efficiency Vermont, through this collaborative, this weatherization collaborative that we've developed, I think is really an important endeavor for us.
Absolutely. If you don't do that, you're not going to sell your product. It's going to be viewed as people come around and offer to seal your driveways. That's your challenge, and it's our challenge to see that you can set some standards for yourselves that move us all along.
Okay. So without taking us too far off track, let me follow up on that a little bit. Are builders or contractors in any way licensed currently?
Currently, no. And in fact, the one disclaimer that's on our radio show, and I'm not trying to draw attention to that, they said, basically, you can't take their advice. You have to go for a licensed professional. And I laughed at that because there's no requirements for licensure with weatherization contractors and also just building contractors in the state. And that's the other bill we're trying to get through, is 157, H157 for contractor registry, not just necessarily to regulate, but more so provide that educational opportunity once again, and to set a better standard. So currently, though, your electrician, your plumber, and other trades like a barber or somebody who does your hair, they would have to be regulated and licensed. A builder who's building this system that is going to be one of the most expensive investments you make, but also it's the place where you live. It's going to affect so many other things about your health, the health and safety of the occupants, not regulated at this time.
Well, thanks. When former Governor Jim Douglas was Secretary of State, I remember him talking about when to license a profession. And I think my paraphrase, I'll have to check and make sure I'm not misparaphrasing, but is in general, he didn't recommend licensure unless two things happened. One was that a normal customer, average customer, should know enough to be able to shop just with discrimination, so that you would choose properly. And I think the things we're talking about are arcane enough that I don't know that most people could choose the right builder based on like building science criteria or something like that. And then the second, so was it common knowledge so that the consumer could protect herself or himself? And then the second thing was, what was the risk of harm? And in this case, I think there is a big price tag that can be associated with a poorly constructed home or weatherization job. So
Specifically, we were called to a house a month and a half ago that is a $1 million house, is for sale. And the buyer asked us to come and look at a clear building science issue. And our analysis showed that there was probably $200,000 worth of work that had to be done to fix the mistakes that were done on that house. So yes.
Also Saturday, mentioned Saturday, where we were this last Saturday. It was another house that was what, 7,000 square feet. It was only 20 years old, and every roof system was failing. One roof system was done with just cellulose, tightly packed, but no air channels, full of mold, full of moisture. The other one was done with fiberglass and foam board. Once again, condensation, ruining the ceilings. This couple that just moved in 2019 found that this is something that can't go back on the previous owner, and they're going to be stuck with this price tag of ripping all the roofs off, all the insulation on a very large house, and it's going to be hugely expensive because proper building science was ignored.
All right, more cautionary tales. With that, let's turn to Mr. Payne. Hello, Mr. Payne. Good to see you again.
Good seeing you, Senator, as well as the others. I think it was probably a month or so ago that Jim and I were there, and I think you came away at least with the understanding, wow, now I understand water and vapor management. So I think we hit that piece squarely.
We're back to chapter 2.
Yeah. A little background. I am the executive director of the Sustainable Energy Outreach Network down in Brattleboro. We go by the name of SEON, so you may have heard that name. And we are a training organization for high-performance builders, as well as how do you engage the community in going to a fossil-free environment. But when we talk about high-performance building, we're not talking about buildings that are hugely expensive. It is fundamental knowledge of building science for efficiency, durability, indoor air quality, safety, aging in place, and the proper selection of products. All of that sort of falls under the rubric. But I've also been involved with workforce development for well over 40 years. Working at the corporate and divisional levels of Fortune 500 companies, as well as higher ed, mainly in a management development capacity, then moving to Vermont and spending time and involving more on the technical side of education, where I was the apprenticeship supervisor for Vermont Heating and Ventilating, as well as FabTech up in the Colchester area. As well as being involved with nonprofits, the tech centers, and I also taught some courses at the Southern Correctional Institution. I've traveled to Austria as part of a Vermont delegation back in 2002 and looked at their technical education program. That's an extraordinary piece. And also, with my experience, very much involved with organizational and leadership development. And I'll get back to the leadership development shortly. But that's been the breadth of my experience. As we go forward, I think, and these are sort of my philosophy, but I think this could weave itself into the working group. And this has been pretty much established that we're looking for a professional development program that's really designed for the long haul of overall career development, that emphasizes knowledge, skill growth, and for me, very much an apprenticeship style learning. Chris has been over in Europe, knows the apprenticeship system. I'm very familiar with some of the Compagnon program over in France, where people come out with an extraordinary skill set. And I remember when I was in Austria and we were looking at the apprenticeship program for machinists, and people looked at the text and said, this is college physics. And these are 15 and 16-year-old kids. So we need to, again, sort of highlight the importance of the knowledge base, when we're talking about the building science, skill base, and the opportunity to learn from a master. We need to, as part of this, we certainly need a sustainable financial support to subsidize the training programs. It's not just helping the homeowners, but for many of the small businesses, ongoing learning is they view it as a cost. For many of us, we will say this is an investment. But there needs to be some kind of incentive such that people can continue with their learning while they're on the job. That's a big lift for an awful lot of the workers. I think we're looking at an integrated program capitalizing on the expertise and assets of all stakeholders, whether they are private organizations, state agencies, career centers, and nonprofits. Something that's not talked about enough, and that is, I think we need to spend a lot of time on the leadership development of crew leaders. These are the people that are going to be instructing, they're going to be Socratic questioning the technicians as they learn, as from open-ended questions, Socratic questions. Why are you doing this? BPI, and oftentimes, is the designation to the company. We need to focus on the specific certifications of the individuals doing the work. They need to have the knowledge so that if they don't see something that corresponds with their knowledge base, they raise their hand, they bring it to the attention. So much of what we've been talking about today has been the actual application of practices that should have been caught if people understood. And we need to drill down to make sure that the individual technicians, the carpenters, the weatherization pros have this knowledge base. And so we need to focus on that leadership development core. So we are developing people appropriately. Part of the program needs to be, and I think as Chris has mentioned and Jim has mentioned, that there's a business development component. And then finally, something that is not talked about is we need to focus on the energy committees within the individual towns. These are the people that have the contacts to the local, to the community. They are writing their energy chapters of their town plan. And I am writing the energy chapter for Rockingham. I well understand that town plans are aspirational with no accountability. We need to turn that around and actually have not an energy chapter, but an energy plan, so that there are short-term, long-term, medium-term goals that are set with specific accountabilities. And in writing our energy plan right now chapter, it's going to be the clear focus is the highest priority will be weatherization. And so I think the energy committees throughout the state, and some are aggressive and some are still trying to figure out what to do. We need to incorporate their work because they're going to be the ones that are out there giving the information to the individual community members. So that's some of my foundational concepts. The others that I would say is, what are we doing now? And sort of what does CEON have in place? Right now, we have a fully integrated certification program called the Level 1 Certification in High Performance Building that is inclusive of 2 certifications. One is a certification in very basic elementary construction skills. That is hand and power tools. That is safety. That is material handling. That is reading documents, rigging. That's very basic, and in fact is taught at the career centers. That's their standard curriculum. We've adopted that for the evening adult programs. The other certification is in entry-level high-performance building practices and principles of building science, as well as hands-on learning. And we incorporate into that certification an apprenticeship style learning where we have a set series of carpentry skills as well as building science skills that need to be checked off by the crew leader. So as I mentioned, there's an apprenticeship style learning. One of the interesting things that we also have is one of our key members of SEON, Peter Yost, teaches a course to the community members on how older houses work. So we have community members sign up, and we deliver that course both in Bellows Falls and down in Brattleboro. We've also offered it down in Northampton. As well as one of the things that was mentioned was, how do you select a builder? And I don't think it falls on the homeowner to understand building science. What they need to understand is, what are you doing to stay current in your practices? When is the last time? What are the resources that you use? So we've developed a checklist of programs to help the homeowners make the kind of selection that is critical. Cost should not be considered. I mean, cost should be considered, but it's not the determinant. In terms of the way we've gone forward in promoting our program, the level 1, we will be building a level 2 and level 3. And in that, you could have two tracks. One could be the carpentry track, the other could be the weatherization track. But we have partnered in the overall work, and we've been working since 2012. Clearly, our go-to has been Efficiency Vermont. And in fact, what Efficiency Vermont does is award credits to the courses that we deliver to apply toward their EEN network. Once a month, we have a building science guild where all the builders check in, and we discuss issues of processes, technologies, new products, as well as case studies. Efficiency Vermont awards credit to those who've attended that working groups. It's called the Building Science Guild. We've also partnered with the Wyndham Regional Career Center. We use their assets, and we use their daytime instructor for evening programs. We have worked with Voc Rehab, VSAC, Vermont Adult Learning, Department of Labor, all as sources to bring in adult students to our program. We've worked with OEO as well as Burlington Electric. So as we've delivered our programs, we've really tried to tap into sort of a history of how do we work with all the agencies that are involved. I realize we're running late, so let me close and say thank you for this opportunity to really share my experience of SEON, my professional experience over 40 years, and my beliefs, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
I muted myself. I'm looking to see if there are any committee questions. I don't see any hands up. I do have a quick question. You were talking about, if you're on a crew, you might look at training as just a cost versus an investment. Can you just say a little bit about that dynamic?
Sure. Well, I think so many, when we're talking about residential builders, they're working on really small margins. And so looking at where do you cut costs? And it really depends on the culture of an organization who recognize that ongoing continuous learning should be a foundation concept by which we operate. That's not the case. It is those organizations that move in that direction are the ones that are the knowledge leaders in the area. These are the people that individuals come to, see that they want to establish themselves, but far too many businesses see this as one more cost to them. And there's not an encouragement to go ahead and do that. Jim and Chris, you're out in the field, they'll say that 90% of the builders do not know this stuff.
Okay.
And, there's Chris not nodding his head. There is a challenge, and I've heard this from leaders. The essence of intellectual curiosity is not part of our culture. And it has to be.
Well, thank you. I think that was a good reminder to work with town energy committees. I've gone to the VCAN conference many times, and it's a group of highly motivated people coming from all those town energy committees. So we've gone a little long, and I think that's good because it's fine because we have a good conversation going. I'm just wondering about people's other commitments. If we don't usually, I try not to have a sit too long all at one moment. If we could take a 10-minute break, then return, Mr. Fazy will clean up and we'll finish with some committee discussion. Do people's schedules allow for that? Okay. So it's 10:25. Let's just go take a break till 10:35.